Resident Evil 3 Remake is underrated, or at least, that's what I hoped I'd be saying right now. You see, this video actually started out as an in-depth look at Resident Evil 3. I went into that game really wanting to defend it. I even had the whole angle planned out. Revisiting a game many people dislike and coming out on the other side singing its praises is classic YouTube goldmine territory. But when I sat down to write this script after playing it for the very first time, something became painfully clear. Everything I dislike about Resident Evil 3 stems from everything I love about Resident Evil 2. The masterful, interconnected level design of the RPD versus the neon-soaked, zombie-ridden streets of Raccoon City. Leon versus Jill, Mr. X versus Nemesis, survival horror versus action horror. And just like that, what started as a retrospective on one game became an almost involuntary comparison between two. And while sure, it might not make for a title as catchy as Resident Evil 3 Remake changed my life, it's at least a little more honest. Because this is how Resident Evil 2 ruined Resident Evil 3 for me. I think it's important to establish one thing. I don't hate Resident Evil 3. In fact, there are things I absolutely adore about it. My favorite moments being when Resident Evil 3, which takes place about 24 hours prior to the events of Resident Evil 2, recontextualizes things you thought you understood, like actually getting to see the moment Marvin gets bitten, the tragedy of him hesitating just briefly as an officer turned zombie mutters a few human words before biting him.
Sorry.
It adds an entirely new weight of context to what Marvin eventually will tell Leon in RE2.
And don't make my mistake. If you see one of those things, uniform or not, you do not hesitate. You take it out, or you run. Got it?
Yes, sir.
Later exploring the RPD as Carlos, seeing the moment the liquor kills those two officers, the same dead bodies of whom which you will see for the very first time as Leon, not knowing what caused it. I especially love this little moment when Carlos directly mentions Leon.
Yeah. Welcome, Leon. Bet you had a kick-ass first day.
All of these moments are genuinely great, but they do reveal a problem. Resident Evil 3 often struggles with identity. It leans heavily into style over substance and sometimes gives off DLC energy rather than feeling like its own fully realized experience. It feels like it's trying to be an action horror game, while still being built on the bones of Resident Evil 2's survival horror engine. By almost every metric, it's louder, more explosive, and more energetic than Resident Evil 2, and yet it never reaches the same heights. Why? Well, there are a number of reasons, but the one I want to start with is level design.
Hello? Is anybody here?
Ah, the RPD. When I think of Resident Evil and what I truly love about this series, I think of this iconic building. When walking inside as Leon or Claire, you're greeted with one of the most stunning renditions of a grand hall. It feels warm, safe even, a direct contrast to the cold, dark, rain-soaked streets you just came from. The grand hall, with its beautiful lighting and towering architecture, becomes the center point of your time here. From this single hall, you'll go left, right, up, and down, slowly unraveling what feels like a never-ending building. The Grand Hall serves as a brief relief, a place to catch your breath between traversing the various horrifying rooms of the RPD. It's one of the few places where you can maintain a sense of control. Because, as you'll quickly come to realize, the police station acts more like a haunted mansion filled with nightmares. The way the building folds into itself so logically, you can't help but form a map in your mind. You begin to understand how it all fits together. The STARS office, the hallway just outside where you encounter your first liquor, the beautiful library, the West office where Leon would have been welcomed on his first day. The RPD is the heart of Resident Evil 2, and it does something very few locations and games ever manage to do. It forces you to understand it in order to progress. At first, this building feels overwhelming. Locked doors everywhere, keys you do not have, staircases that only lead up halfway to where you want to go. But slowly, piece by piece, the building reveals itself. There's an incredible sense of accomplishment here. By forcing yourself into rooms and hallways you'd rather avoid, by opening a locker that might scare the ever-living shit out of you like it did me, eventually you'll find that key that unlocks a shortcut, suddenly making an entire wing more accessible. A crank that opens a path and reshapes how you move between floors. A valve you find on the complete other side of the building finally allows you to go through the steam that blocked you hours earlier. And no matter what, the medallion puzzle always brings you back to the Grand Hall, reinforcing its role as the heart of the building. Files and transcripts scattered throughout give you clues that unlock puzzles, upgrades and weapons. Everything feels so intentionally placed. And when it comes to level design, having just one building be so intricate, so worth the time you spend learning it, my brain immediately goes to one question. What would this look like if they placed this attention to detail, this expert level design, not just in one single building, but across an entire city block? Resident Evil 3 attempts to answer that question, although personally, I don't quite like its answer. Resident Evil 3 starts incredibly strong. Jill is immediately thrown into the chaos of Raccoon City at the exact moment the virus begins to consume it. And not to mention a giant bioweapon called Nemesis bursts through her wall and is now actively trying to kill her. But we will get to that gigantic disappointment a little later in the video. In Resident Evil 3, your first explorable hub is a small, interconnected slice of Raccoon City. At first, it looks phenomenal. Being thrown into the immediate aftermath of the outbreak makes for a powerful statement. Cars smashed through storefronts, bodies scattered across the streets, explosions echoing in the distance, zombies crawling from underneath broken vehicles. In Resident Evil 2, you mostly hear about the fall of Raccoon City, while being confined inside the RPD, underground in the sewers, or exploring the nest. In Resident Evil 3, you actually get to walk outside almost immediately after the outbreak begins. There's one moment that really stuck with me in those early hours. I walked into a pharmacy and rounded a corner only to find a vehicle driven straight through the window, and inside the vehicle, the radio was still playing. It's such an eerie slice of life detail. The bodies that were presumably flung from the vehicle lie motionless while the ads continue on as if nothing happened. That is the kind of environmental storytelling that Resident Evil does so well. The type of storytelling that really thrived in a location as intricately designed as the RPD, where you could spend hours just walking through its various rooms, reading about events past, and piecing together what happened just by looking at the surroundings. Resident Evil 3, at least in theory, takes those mechanics and that style of storytelling and spreads it across several city blocks. The incredibly detailed abandoned magazine stands in the train station, the eerily empty restaurant, the locked gates and narrow back alleys filled with zombies devouring a lifeless corpse. It all almost convinces you that what you're experiencing is just as good as the RPD, because you are backtracking. You are solving puzzles, you're unlocking shortcuts. It feels like classic Resident Evil design. But the more you play, the more you realize that much of that expansiveness is surface level. This is by no means an area you will truly have to learn because you spend less than 2 hours here. There are only a handful of meaningful routes, and by handful, I really just mean one. Getting lost is literally impossible because of its linear structure. There are very few tangible rewards, if any, for going off the beaten path, and even suggesting that you can stray from the main route would be crediting it with the freedom it just simply does not offer. The puzzles are insultingly simple, rarely forcing you to think for more than a few seconds, but I think the most frustrating part by far is that it looks bigger than it actually is. I remember seeing the map of Raccoon City before seeing it with my own eyes down in the train station. I remember thinking, look how big that is. So just imagine my disappointment when I discovered entire buildings and roads blocked off with debris and broken down vehicles, doors that look accessible but literally never open, streets that suggest exploration simply funnel you towards a linear objective. Even the toy store is little more than a small reception area. It's like walking onto a movie set only to realize that none of the buildings are real. There are no secret routes, no hidden passages, and no meaningful rewards for your curiosity. It's the illusion of scale without the substance that would give it size. Now, circling back to Resident Evil 2, the reason you're forced to learn the RPD's layout is not just because you need to know where everything is in order to progress or collect the medallions. It serves a gameplay purpose. Understanding the layout of the building is the only way you can survive and outsmart the stalker that is Mr. X, an enemy that will relentlessly follow you throughout the RPD. Your memory of the building's layout almost literally becomes your only line of defense. You see him heading towards you, but you know if you enter the door closest to you, you'll be in the library. You can use the ladder to escape his grasp and circle back to your objective from a completely different angle. That level of design empowers the player in a way that Resident Evil 3 simply lacks. Because when you place a stalker-type enemy into a location that is far more linear, with almost no verticality and very few interesting routes to choose from, you quickly realize something. Much like the city scope, the stalker scope has been reduced as well. I don't think it's a reach to say that one of the best parts of Resident Evil 2 is Mr. X. I mean, let's start with his design. I absolutely dig the trench coat and hat, although that might be considered biased. More importantly, I love how he moves. He never runs, and that's very intentional. Resident Evil 2 is a survival horror game. Resources are limited. Leon and Claire both move deliberately and somewhat slowly. Unlike Resident Evil 3, basic encounters with zombies feel tense. It's almost like a game of chess, constantly calculating the safest route through a room because one grab or bite can be devastating to your health and your limited healing items. Now add another layer, Mr. X, a force of nature that could very easily have tipped the experience into frustrating rather than fun. Yet somehow it works, flawlessly. You have already mastered the RPD's layout by the time he is introduced and becomes a constant presence. And although Mr. X can follow you almost anywhere, he moves at a very specific pace. You're just slightly faster than him, just enough to escape if you make the right split-second decisions. I genuinely think it's one of the most perfectly balanced stalker systems in modern horror games. And sure, after a few replays you start noticing his limitations. If Mr. X is above you and there's no functional ladder nearby, he simply cannot drop down to reach you, so he just kinda stands there, awkwardly. If you circle around a large object, he won't catch you and you can keep that loop going, basically forever. But to me, those flaws feel more like purposeful limitations. Design choices meant to ensure that the stalking remains terrifying, but also genuinely fun to deal with. And that is the difference. He is a core part of the gameplay loop of the RPD, and he's never just relegated to mere spectacle, unlike Resident Evil 3 Stalker.
Come on, start, damn it!
Nemesis should have been a terrifying evolution of Mr. X, faster, smarter, and more aggressive. Instead, he is mostly reduced to quick-time events and scripted sequences that offer very little real tension, and the few times he actually stalks you in the city are over quicker than this game's runtime, which, believe me, is a feat. And because the city is so linear in its design, there really is no outsmarting Nemesis through calculated routes. You kinda just run to where the game wants you next and you'll be fine. If you do happen to get caught by him, he's surprisingly easy to take down. One blast from a grenade or an explosion from a barrel and he falls to the ground, often dropping a gear upgrade. Thanks, I guess? I don't know, man, there's something very immersion-breaking about Nemesis, this bioengineered weapon of mass destruction, hell-bent on killing me, just casually dropping an extended magazine for my troubles. The worst part, I think, is that the actual stalking is over, and I kid you not, less than 20 minutes. Every other scene where he chases you is completely scripted. I remember the exact moment I completely checked out from this game. It was during the scripted flamethrower chase. A moment clearly designed to be intense and terrifying. You're supposed to feel like Nemesis is right on your heels, but he never truly is. As long as you keep running where the game wants you to go, he can literally never catch you. And nowhere is that more obvious than when in the middle of this supposedly high-intensity chase, you can just stop at a typewriter, save your game, even change your gear if you want to. Perhaps grab a fucking cup of tea, because I guess the game just decided you have time now. You're in this strange liminal space where Nemesis cannot reach you until you decide to move forward. And that is the main problem. Mr. X hunts you with a relentless pressure no matter where you are. Nemesis, on the other hand, waits for his cue to appear and disappear. The only time he feels like a real threat is within the multiple boss fights, which, to be fair to the game, all look phenomenal. But this is again where my bias shows, because no matter how audacious, explosive and loud this game got, it never impressed me as much as the more intimate, slower portrayal of horror that Resident Evil 2 commits so hard to. Resident Evil 3 is, at its core, trying to be an action horror game. There are weapons everywhere, ammo is generous, healing items are scattered so frequently that you almost never feel truly vulnerable. The game is not trying to scare you, it's trying to thrill you, yet it feels awkward. And it's not because action horror cannot work. I recently played Resident Evil 4 Remake for the very first time and I absolutely loved it. That game embraces what it wants to be. The combat arenas are wide and layered, offering verticality and multiple routes. Enemies force you to adapt. Leon is built from the ground up to function like an action hero. His movement, responsiveness, and the pacing of all the encounters all support the identity of an action horror game. Resident Evil 3 though, lacks that cohesion, because it's very clearly built on the bones of Resident Evil 2, a survival horror game designed for tight spaces, limited resources, slow and creeping tension, pressure created by intricate level design and deliberate enemy placement. Resident Evil 3 tries to layer action horror on top of a foundation that was never built for it. It's using the same engine, built for something more methodical, but forcing it to be faster. The same enemy types, designed for strategic encounters in one game that now pose almost no real threat. The same claustrophobic level design, originally built for careful movement, is now attempting to accommodate dodge rolls and explosive action.
Rocket launcher? Really?
Nowhere is this disconnect in design more obvious than in the RPD. You visit this location in both Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3. Although only briefly in 3, the game manages to reduce what was once an iconic location to little more than nostalgia. The intricate loops and layered pathways give way to a far more linear, action-driven sequence, where you mow down lickers and zombies with relative ease. What was once tense and methodical becomes nothing more than a shooting gallery. And in that translation, something important gets lost. That is why Resident Evil 3 never quite feels like its own thing. It's not a fully reimagined action horror experience like Resident Evil 4. It's also not a tightly designed survival horror like Resident Evil 2. It feels like Resident Evil 2 turned up louder. And when your entire foundation is a game as tightly constructed as Resident Evil 2, being louder just makes noise without any substance. Now, I want to be fair. Resident Evil 2, at least in my opinion, is one of the best remakes ever made, but that doesn't make it flawless. I do have some minor issues with it, the biggest one being the A and B scenario structure. Playing as Leon or Claire makes far less of a difference than it should. Nothing you do in Leon's campaign meaningfully impacts Claire's second run and vice versa. You solve many of the same puzzles, open the same doors, fight variations of the same bosses. Logically, from a narrative standpoint, that just does not make sense. It weakens what could have been a truly interconnected dual campaign structure. And it's the main reason I stopped just short of calling it a masterpiece. But what it does exceptionally well. The slower paced horror is fantastic. The resource management, the level design of the RPD, the sewers and the nest are some of the best in the series. And when you compare that to what Resident Evil 3 offers, I can't help but feel that RE2 ruins RE3 for me. If you enjoyed this investigation into Resident Evil 2 and 3, consider watching one of my many other Resident Evil videos right here. And I'll see you in the next investigation. Thank you for watching.